Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
My name is Evelyn Harper, and I am not crazy. I think I've been in this mental institution for almost 7 years, though I know I don't belong here. It's early morning now, and I'm lying perfectly still in my bed, feigning sleep. The meds they gave me yesterday have finally worn off, and for the first time in what feels like forever, I can think clearly. If I remain silent and unnoticed, maybe, just maybe, they won't make me take another pill. Another dose to blur my thoughts, numb my senses, and plunge me back into that endless, suffocating darkness. Almost normal. That's what I feel like right now. My mind is still a little fuzzy, but at least I can think. I can feel things again. The hard mattress beneath me, the scratchy cotton of the standard issue bra and panties, the shapeless one-piece dress they make me wear every day. And best of all, I can remember. I can remember fragments of my life before this place. I close my eyes and focus on the early morning sounds of this place. The muffled breathing of the other women still lost in their drugged sleep, the faint rustle of restless movements, and, cutting through it all, the haunting cries of someone far down the hall. Somewhere, behind a locked door, a fellow inmate is howling in the dark. These are poor souls whose fractured minds drive them to howl through the night, as if the fading light of day awakens something raw and untamed within them. I'm not exactly sure when I started to become aware of my surroundings, but one night I woke up and had to use the bathroom. Usually, I just went right here in my bed. I was so drugged, I just didn't know the difference. But this one early morning, I got up and used the toilet in the corner. Somewhere there was going to be a very happy orderly later that day because she had no mess for me to clean up. I have been remembering more and more every day, but I can't let any of the nurses or attendants know this. If they find out, my meds will be increased and I will fade back into oblivion. So far, I have been able to figure out that this is a state-run institution by what I can see or hear going on around me. The help only does the minimum necessary to keep their jobs. The rooms and equipment are poorly maintained or needing replacement. The state hides the mental patients away to prevent upsetting the normals, the outsider. I have wondered, why am I here? I remember being a senior VP in some large corporation. I was making serious money in my job. I was married and my husband worked for the federal government. We lived on a small farm outside of a large western New York State city with our 2 children. My husband was a stay-at-home dad, working with all his computers in his office. Me, I was picked up by chauffeur every morning and driven to the company headquarters and returned home at night. I was climbing the corporate ladder and ignoring my family plus everything and everyone else. I remember becoming a self-centered bitch. I can remember now how everything started. I was single and working for a local tool and die company. It was a small company owned privately by a Mr. Theodore Blake. He was the founder and a very kind gentleman. When I started with the company, Mr. Blake was in his 60s and still working every day. He was in his office by 7 a.m. and still there at 7 p.m. All the employees loved him because of the way he treated them. If anyone called him Mr. Blake, they got a dressing down. My name is Frank. My father was Mr. Blake and he's dead now, was usually how the dressing down began. When he finished, he smiled and said, "Please?" I was hired as a front office employee. My job was to be a secretary, personal assistant, switchboard operator, gopher, and basically a girl Friday for all the men working in the front office. It was a small company and everyone pitched in. I met my husband Greg at a Starbucks near where I worked. Physically, he was exactly the type of man I was drawn to. He was about 6 foot tall and around 200 pounds. He wasn't a bit fat, but looked as if he had a hard body under his suit. As far as the rest of the package was concerned, he had dirty blonde hair, a pleasant smile, and the softest brown eyes I had ever seen. When our eyes met the first time, I felt as if I was looking into the soul of a small puppy. His eyes appeared to want to worship me. I think I fell a little bit in love with him then. I'm surprised that Greg didn't immediately spot my beautiful features. I was proud of my body. It had developed while I was in high school. When I started in the 9th grade, I was built like a skinny boy. By the time I graduated, I was smoking hot. My body had filled out very nicely. I was 5 feet 4 inches tall and 110 pounds. I played soccer and ran some cross country. Thus, my legs were nice. All in all, I was a borderline dream for guys. Men chased me, not the other way around. But then there was Greg. I didn't actually stalk him, but I started showing up at Starbucks daily. I soon figured out his Starbucks schedule, and I was right next to him in line. That graduated to sharing a table, then meeting for lunch, and finally, after a couple of months, a real date. It's not that Greg was shy. He would do anything I asked. It's just that he never took the initiative. I had to ask him for anything I wanted. But to his credit, if I asked, he immediately did it for me. He never complained or reneged. I just assumed that he would soon know my likes and dislikes and I wouldn't need to ask. I was a selfish bitch. I wanted it my way and only my way. It took about 6 months before I had to make the first move. Now I wasn't a virgin or anything. I was a nice girl. But Greg was driving me nuts. He would walk me to my apartment door, kiss me until my knees were weak, and then leave. I knew he was feeling something because I could feel his excitement pressing against me while we kissed. But damn it, he wouldn't make the necessary moves. Batteries for my electronic lover were becoming a major part of my budget. One night I was just too horny. When we got back to my apartment, I dragged him right into my bedroom. I'd like to say that the first time was great, but I'd be lying. The first time got the job done. By the time, well, actually the next 3 times that night was over, I found out that Greg really knew his way around a girl's body. I was one happy girl. My apartment lease ran out 4 months later, and I moved into Greg's small house. We started our life together. The door to my small room opened, and a female attendant entered. "Okay, honey, it's time to get up, take your meds and get cleaned up." I slowly stood up as if I was still medicated. She had me strip naked and start walking to the shower room. The medication cart was at the shower room door, and she handed me a small paper cup with my 2 pills in it. I put the pills in my mouth as she watched. When she turned to put the water on, I spit the pills into my hand. Once in the shower, I opened my hand and let the pills wash down the drain. She washed me down, not seeing the pills fall. I was starting my way out of my drug-induced stupor. A fleeting thought crossed my mind. What if I need these pills to stay alive? But then I really didn't care if I lived or died. I just wanted my mind back. My next memory to return was after about 10 years of married life. I had 7-year-old twin children, a boy and a girl. Greg and I had a nice house in the country. It sat on 20 acres of rolling hills with a pool and a small horse barn with 2 horses. We had no close neighbors. Greg was a stay-at-home dad and did something for the government. My job was a lot more important, or so I thought. I never actually paid much attention to his work. Perhaps it was for some intelligence agency like the FBI, CIA, or NSA or something. I suspected that because every once in a while, a man would appear at our front door asking for Greg. The man would be carrying a briefcase that was chained to his wrist. As the time passed, Mr. Blake sold the business. He had 2 children, but they had no interest in running a small firm. So, our little tool and die company was absorbed by a larger out-of-state company. None of our original employees lost their jobs. To be exact, our front office soon was home to some more important people from our new parent company, and the entire operation was expanded. The business thrived, and my duties increased. The merger of this business with others happened 3 more times in that 10-year span. Each time I got more responsibilities, but was traveling at least 2 or 3 weeks a month toward the end. My family life was disintegrating. Greg did everything with the kids. He was both father and mother to them. I was just someone who seemed to occasionally visit for a day or 2. I was surprised that the kids just didn't call me Evelyn instead of mother. Mother, not mom or ma, but mother. I never noticed at the time, but now looking back it seemed they never felt anything for me towards the end. I was just a stranger in the house whose name happened to be Mother. Mother was my name, not my job as far as they were concerned. Greg had replaced me in their eyes as the go-to parent. Greg was always there for them. He got them up in the morning, off to school, sat up with them when they were ill, helped with their homework, was there for their after-hours school activities, plus read to and tucked them in at night. If I was home and they needed something, I'd offer to help, but the answer always was, "It's okay, Mother. Dad will do it." Their refusal of my help did hurt at the time, but soon I was again buried in my work and the hurt went away. Greg was always there for me. When I asked for something, he dropped whatever he was doing to honor my request. But he never anticipated any of my wishes. At work it was completely different. The people who worked for me knew exactly what I wanted almost before I wanted it. I was treated like a queen, their queen. While at my home I was just a visitor. I just buried my head in my work and excelled as a VP, but as a wife and mother I flopped. My shower was over, and the attendant dried me off with a rough towel. She wasn't gentle and my skin was soon glowing red from her efforts. I wondered if the towel could also be substituted for sandpaper if necessary. It sure felt like it. Then I suddenly realized I could actually feel the towel. My day got off to a better start because of that realization. When the orderly finished drying me, I started walking, still nude, to the food area. "Hold on, lady. You must get dressed first before you can walk around." She then mumbled. Damn, I might as well record that statement because I say it every morning. Evelyn smiled internally. She was acting exactly as expected by the help. She watched as the other patients shuffled down the hall, matching their walk purposely. She let the attendant dress her before being led to breakfast. My next memory of my past was of my new boss. He was about my age and a very powerful man. He was climbing the corporate ladder at a rate that scared his peers. It was rumored that soon he would be the COO and president. He was going to be the number 2 at the company. And best of all, he liked me. Mark Ellis was my boss. He picked me to be his favorite go-to VP. At the time he arrived at our headquarters, I was just a department head. 2 years later, I was a VP working directly for him. I would watch his direct reports shiver under his stern looks. He exhibited power. His shows of strength made me wet. Greg always took care of me sexually. He was a good lover. He always made sure I climaxed. But it was plain vanilla sex, enjoyable but bland. But Mark had something else. Until he arrived on the scene, I never knew I was that turned on by powerful men. Now I knew I was, and when he looked at me sometimes, I knew he could see it too. Sometimes I felt that if he told me to, I'd strip and give myself to him. It was just a matter of time before he did exactly that. Greg and the kids had made plans to go to a Disney park for 2 weeks. They did not include me in their plans. To be exact, I found out they were going 2 days before they were scheduled to leave. I overheard one of the kids on the phone telling a friend about the trip. I tried to pick a fight with Greg over not being invited to go with him, but he countered, "Aren't you going on that facility inspection tour with your boss, Mark Ellis?" I was almost sure I hadn't told Greg. How did he know? Greg's statement took the wind out of my argument. Angrily, I drove to my office and slept on the couch that night because I was so pissed at Greg. The next night when I returned home, I found an empty house. They had left on vacation without even saying goodbye. Mark Ellis benefited from my anger. For our 2 weeks traveling together, I kept him drained. I was like a wild woman, but best of all, he just took me. He used me. He didn't care for my pleasure, only his own. My husband Greg always took care of my needs. Mark did no such tender things. He used and abused me, and I loved the treatment. If I happened to enjoy myself, so be it. If I wanted to enjoy myself, that was my problem, not Mark's. He could have cared less as long as he got his. If I was close and he beat me to the finish, it was all over. He stopped and made me get out of bed and get something to clean him up with. More than once, I finished myself off in the bathroom while getting a warm washcloth to use on him. Near the end of my 2-week plant tour with Mark, I got a text message from Greg. "We're having great time. Going to extend our vacation another week or 2. So Greg and I extended our plant tour another week. I came home, after another week and a half, to an empty house. My family was still on vacation and didn't return for another 10 days. They were ecstatic. I was pissed. Things were quiet around the house until I returned to work. Mark planned another trip for us next month. This time we would be gone a month and visit all the European facilities. I would be the only female. There were 3 other guys going with us to help inspect the facilities. I started to tell Greg about the upcoming trip, but he had no interest. He seemed to know about the trip before I did. It was almost as if he knew the agenda better than I did. Greg was his normal attentive self for the remainder of the time I spent home. He would be available for anything the kids wanted. If I was home and the kids were out with their friends, Greg stayed locked in his office working. If I wanted him to do something, he would leave his room to accomplish my desired task and return directly to his study. I felt very lonely. Everyone in my house ignored me unless I asked directly for something. I spent more and more time in my office. A couple of nights Mark came back to the building and kept me company. Well, not really. He just wanted to get laid and I was available. He made use of my body to get his satisfaction. Most of those evenings, I didn't finish and went home horny. Greg seemed to be too busy those nights help me out. In fact, I couldn't remember exactly how long ago we had sex. Sometimes I wished I still had my battery-powered friend, but I had tossed it away when I married. I did not sleep well those nights. When my trip finally arrived, no one was home to see me off. Greg took the kids to school that morning because he had a parent-teacher meeting, he said. I was kind of bummed that morning. For some reason, I wanted to see my family before I left, but I guess they didn't want to see me. After breakfast, all the inmates in my ward were taken to the playroom. We sat at various tables and did menial tasks to measure our dexterity and any signs of progress. I watched the inmates around me and soon was mimicking their movements. I don't know why, none of the attendants or nurses paid any attention to us. They just sat in their office and chatted or played card games on the computer. I began hope of some sort of an escape. I was clear-headed enough to know I need a plan. So I started gathering whatever information I thought I might need. Escape? Hell, I didn't even know where I was, let alone how to perpetrate one. I thought, I really must be crazy after all. Now that my drugs were beginning to wear off, I noticed time passed much more slowly. I could not carry on a conversation with the attendants lest they realize I was coming out from under the influence of the drugs and put me back under, and carry on a conversation with the other inmates. Now, really? So the hours turned to days, the days to weeks, and the weeks to months. The boredom was driving me crazy. If I wasn't crazy while under the influence of the drugs, I soon would be anyway. I missed human interaction. I decided to try to remember the rest of my life. If I could remember, I might regain my sanity and my family. My memories slowly returned to me. I was sitting in a company jet next to Mark. He was talking to the other men about the things we would be looking for as we toured our plants. At the same time, his hand was under my skirt rubbing my thighs. While he was discreet, I knew all the others saw what was going on. Just the fact that others were watching affected me. I felt myself getting excited and wanting for more, a lot more. Mark whispered in my ear, "Use the restroom and remove your panties. Bring them back to me." It was not a wish but a command. I obeyed. I could not look at my fellow travelers, but felt them all looking at me with a hunger in their eyes. "She's one of the best, as you guys will soon find out," he told his companions, then pulled me out of my seat and onto my knees in front of the other men. Then, I began my journey into hell, and I loved every minute of it. When we arrived at the hotel, Mark took me. When he had had his pleasure with me, he made me walk naked down the hall to the suite our guys were in. It was almost 4 a.m. before none of them could perform anymore. I was an exhausted and sore, but a very satisfied woman. I started to get up to walk back to Mark's in my room when one of the guys stopped me. "Mark doesn't want you back tonight. He said to tell you that you're too dirty for him to use again tonight. You can sleep on the floor here." I suddenly realized that I wasn't just Mark's woman, the love of his life, but his to gift to people he wanted to reward. My status had changed. I was now a sex toy. The next thing I remember is waking up as the plane was landing. We had arrived at our next stop. I was a mess. It was dark, and I was helped into another limo. The driver checked out my body before I got in the car. "Wait," he said, "I don't want her messing up my back seat. I'll get a blanket out of the trunk for her to sit on." So, there I stood, naked in the cool night air, waiting for him to put a blanket on his precious back seat. All I wanted to do was get to our hotel and climb in a tub and get clean. So, I sat on the blanket. That's how the rest of the month went. The group I was traveling with used me in the hotel rooms. They even brought some of their friends or other men they had met in the various hotel bars. Mark passed me around to various managers at the factories we were touring. If I wasn't being screwed, I was recovering from pulling a train. I loved the feelings. I felt myself change. I was no longer the high-powered executive, but a simple street hooker. They knew what I wanted done to me when I had sex. No longer did I need to order my husband around to get my satisfaction. I could just spread my legs and let someone else be responsible for my pleasure. It was a great month. I didn't get dressed again until the plane touched down at the end of our trip, and then I dressed on the tarmac as my group watched. Mark and I had our own car and driver. The rest of the group had driven their own cars to the airport. On the ride back to the office it happened. I don't remember much about the accident, just the sound of screaming tires and the crash of metal, and then the blackness. I woke in pain. The doctor gave me a shot, and I faded into the darkness again, but at least the pain went away. It was 2 weeks before I was conscious again. I was groggy and really didn't have a grip on anything. The doctor explained what had happened to me. "You were in a car accident 2 weeks ago. The man you were riding with was killed instantly when the car rolled over him. The police found no identification on either of you. They assumed your ID was destroyed when the limo burned along with the driver. My name is Evelyn Harper, and his name was Mark Ellis. We are executives at Blake Tool & Die," I offered. "We were returning from a business trip. Why wasn't my husband Greg by my side with the children?" The police arrived in my room. I repeated my story to them. They left strangely quiet. All they said was, "We'll get back to you." I wasn't going anywhere. I had a broken leg, a broken foot, a couple of broken ribs, some scarring on my face from broken glass, a concussion, and some damage to my back. About a week later, they moved me from my private room to a ward. I now had 3 roommates. When the hospital staff explained that I had no health insurance and was being put in a charity ward, I threw a fit. I wasn't a charity case. I was an important VP at a major company. I soon was given another shot. The next day, the lead detective paid me a visit. "Mrs. Harper, we have a bit of a problem. It seems as if there is no record of you ever existing, nor your friend Mark Ellis. Call my husband. He'll straighten this out. I'm sorry, but we can find no record of your husband ever existing. The address you gave us is an empty lot. The company you claim to work for has moved to another state. They claim they have no records of you ever working for them. Do you want me to continue?" I don't really remember anything else until waking up a couple of weeks later. The doctor that was treating me said I suffered a shock to my system, and that was why I stayed away for those past weeks. A month later, Evelyn was transferred to a secure mental facility. There was a complicated diagnosis which all boiled down to saying she was delusional and didn't have a grip on reality. She was put on an antipsychotic drug and soon drifted into darkness. The drugs basically shut her conscious, delusional mind off. She spent the next 10 years this way until some purchasing agent started buying a cheaper substitute for this drug. It was a cost-saving measure. The new version of this drug was not as effective. Slowly, Evelyn started coming back into the world of the living. The administrator at the mental facility signed off on another report. He took a second to wonder why some agency of the federal government was paying attention to one of his inmates before signing the form. As he glanced at the paperwork, he admired the effort put in by his staff to make this report fully comprehensive. It covered every action and consequence of this poor woman. He noted that the staff indicated she was no longer taking her meds and appeared completely free of their effects. As he put the report in his completed pile, he wondered if she's drug-free, then her mind should have recovered. She should be back to normal. If she's normal and pretending to be ill, then she won't be able to risk having any human interaction. While starting the next report, he thought, God, she must be lonely if she's pretending. The administrator shifted his attention to the next request, a purchase order for supplies. Jane Doe was quickly put out of his mind. Greg was sitting on his lanai outside his home in Hawaii. He had moved here with his children after he found out his wife, Evelyn, was cheating on him. He had planned his revenge carefully. He was still a case officer for the CIA where planning and execution were his areas of expertise. Because of his position, the government very closely watched over him and his family. They were constantly checking up on them to keep him from being open to blackmail. One day years ago, his boss called him on his secure phone. Greg, I have bad news for you. Evelyn is having an affair. We are taking action to relocate you and your children to another location or get rid of her or both. Do you have a preference? Greg knew he could never confront her about the affair. The agency would not allow any action of that type by him. If he gave her the slightest hint he knew of her transgressions, they would kill her. Still filled with anger, he felt that killing her was just too easy a punishment. He wanted her to suffer as much as he had and still was. He and his boss began planning his revenge, but of course, they called it his relocation. It took 6 months, but the plan finally came together. Evelyn would be out of town on a facilities tour with her boss and lover, while he and the children would simply vanish. The CIA would relocate them to a new city, complete with new identities and an untraceable past. The children would be told that the move was necessary because their mother had tragically died in an auto accident. The story would detail how the limo's cruise control malfunctioned, sending the vehicle careening at over 70 miles per hour before flipping 3 times. After all that, their doctors were amazed. She was still alive. Unfortunately, that required a plan variation and a Jane Doe relocation where Jane could be treated properly. All traces of their lives with Evelyn were erased, and there were no longer any records of Evelyn's life to be found. One sunny morning, Greg walked into his office and dropped the monthly report into his paper shredder. He thought, the bitch got her mind back now and will forever suffer the loneliness I have been going through all these years. And if she isn't careful, it could drive her crazy. Greg smiled and looked out at the ocean. His plan was working. Greg glanced at the calendar on his desk, July 20th. Happy anniversary, bitch. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.